Okay, it's 1 minute past. So welcome to this first Pinnacle webinar from the risk team at Pinnacle. Just sort of a few little bits of sort of housekeeping. We're recording this, so those that are either late or that can't make it, we will be sharing that or able to share it with them. And a really warm welcome to you, and a really warm welcome to Mark and Daryl. If you want to ask any questions, if you could raise those through the chat, you should be able to chat. And Gemma and the small team that's helped us put this together will get those questions to us. And so let's make a start. So can I just first of all introduce Mark Parr? So Mark is the CIO of HFW, and Daryl from FileTrail. I'm going to just ask each of you to just very quickly sort of introduce yourselves, and then I will introduce myself. So Mark.
Thanks, Christopher. Hello, everybody. Mark Parr. I am the Global Director of IT, or CIO of HFW. I've been in post a little over 18 months now. And the fact that I'm only 28 but have this shocking beard and hair would suggest that the job has aged me a lot. Prior to HFW, I was the head of information assurance at KPMG, so I was the CISO there. I was at KPMG for 5 years, and prior to that, I spent 27 years in the Army, where I was responsible for command and control networks and information assurance across defense.
Brilliant, thank you. So loads to share with everyone, and really practical experience. So over to you, Daryl. Do you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Daryl Merveau, and I'm the president and one of the founders of FileTrail. And we have been involved in bringing records management and information governance solutions to organizations for the past 20 years, and been involved in how that has changed in the marketplace. So I'm glad to be here and to participate.
Brilliant, thank you, Daryl. So my name's Christopher Young. I lead the risk practice here at Pinnacle. Pinnacle is a implementation consultancy focused entirely on the legal sector. We've got about 100 people, just over 100 people, who work on, in a number of practice areas. We have a finance systems practice area that's sort of well known. As I say, I lead the risk practice area, and then we have a business development sort of practice area. Our risk team has been around for about 7 years, and primarily, or historically, we've focused on new business intake and the information governance that sort of goes with that. And we've recently signed a partnership with FileTrail to help them deploy the toolset in law firms here in Europe. And so that's a little bit about us. Just to make sure that we all know what we mean by this wonderful term, information governance, I thought it might be helpful to just sort of describe the arena and who does what. And so for us, information governance covers everything from cybersecurity through to records management. So we're not going to talk about today cybersecurity or e-discovery. We will talk a bit about privacy and data protection. Risk and compliance is sort of, I guess, embedded within the term. We'll talk a bit about data analytics and data governance, and as Daryl's already alluded to, sort of records management and information management. Just to sort of position us as organizations, sort of FileTrail largely covers this data governance, records management, and information management. And those sort of softer, more organizational things are where Pinnacle brings its expertise. So that risk and compliance, the data analytics, those sorts of things. So that's the, I guess, the space that we're we're talking about. So we're not going to talk, as I say, about e-discovery or cybersecurity, because well, certainly I don't know anything about it. I'm sure Mark does, but so what I want to do now is, I guess that's the sort of theory. What I thought we would do to start with was go back to Mark and his journey at HFW, and so and I guess make this really practical. So, Mark, what were the sort of problems and priorities as you saw them when you arrived at HFW? Because I'm sure that they're no different from the issues that other firms sort of face.
Yeah, and it was twofold, I think. Firstly, there's the desire by the business to talk about data and data insights, because they hear that out in the marketplace and they can, they sort of go, that's a good terminology. How do we add value to our clients? Well, we do that by providing insights from data. And then there's the technical, the real aspect of how do I, as the head of technology, how do I look after it? How do I store it? How do I maintain it? How do I secure it? How do I make it available? How do I dispose of it? So certainly early in my tenure, there was a conversation to be had with the senior leadership of the firm. So the general counsel was part of this conversation, the managing partner, and the head of risk, to say, look, we have got a raft of siloed, unstructured data across our network. And for those who are unaware, HFW, we're a global firm. We have grown over the last couple of years through M&A, so absorbing extra data into our network, but not necessarily in a way that has meant it's all sort of consolidated, has meant that actually we've just connected it and bolted it together. Means that I have a huge amount of unstructured data that I don't necessarily know where it's at, what's in it, and how, when I think about information governance, for me, that's a bit around, there's the information assurance, the cybersecurity bit, there's the information exploitation, the actual data insights bit, and then there's the information management, the retention, the security, and all those aspects. So when I think of those, that means you've got to understand your landscape. So for me, the very first exercise was, one, to get the management buy-in that says this is a business issue. We currently have huge amounts of fragmented data. My view is to move us into that democratization of data, so making data available to everybody in the right instance, the right place. And that's not as simple as just getting a technology overlay. There are lots of tools you could buy that could help that journey, but you've got to make sure that as an organization, you've thought about your retention policies, you've thought about your business owners, you've thought about information owners, asset owners, and have that full sort of chain of command, the hierarchy you need across all that data to really sort of manage it properly. The biggest change, and something that I still struggle with, and perhaps this is a vagary of the LLP model, is I have many partners in my organization who I need to take on this journey with me. So that conversation is one that doesn't always land as well as perhaps you would hope. So I'll have the technology conversation. That's quite straightforward. I want to spend some money. I'm going to move us into the cloud. I'm going to move into the cloud. I don't want to just lift and shift because of the costs associated with that. They understand that as a sort of board when I ask for that investment, but I talk to partners individually about their role to play with data. That's when I'm quite often faced with the challenge around, well, you're in charge of technology, you figure it out. And that's a really interesting conversation. The bit that hasn't quite really sort of come to bear yet in the legal sector, but something I was really acutely aware of when I was at KPMG, is the regulator's part to play in this. And I think as the SRA particularly starts to get more teeth and starts to think more about information and what that really means, then that's when you'll see law firms really sharpen up their practices. Because I think right now, and I speak to my peers across the community, very many of them are struggling with this concept. Where do we have it? Where's that data held? How do we consolidate it? How do we provide the democratization whilst working in the different environments? So I've got a presence in Australia. The rules there will be different to the rules in China versus the rules I have to worry about in the Middle East, the GDPR for Europe, DPA 2018 here in the UK, and then across in the US and South America. How do I map those different things? And the fact that in the US you will have state by state variation, and how do I think about that as a regulation versus what I overlay in Geneva or Paris or the team in Brussels. So lots and lots of different moving parts here to sort of think about how they connect together, really, to get to that, that utopia that is information that is governed appropriately, that is exploited in a way that provides insight to the business and to our clients, that is assured, and therefore the confidentiality, integrity, availability is wrapped into it, and then that information that is disposed of and secured properly, and that you look after.
And just, I guess partly because we've all worked in the sector for so long, how are you doing on the destruction bit? Because my experience of working with lawyers is that even scrappy Post-it notes, they need to be retained. They're really valuable.
Yeah. And this is really where you start to think about, it's not just electronic data, it's hard soft copy data, and the policies around that. I had a wonderful scenario when I arrived in the firm, and I spoke to a rather senior individual, and I walked in his office and I said, "Are you moving?" It was just awash with boxes, and they were full of case files. So that's it's been an interesting journey. We have started to really be quite strict about this. So we have said, our retention policy right now, we've said anything older than 15 years, we dispose of immediately. There is no requirement, electronic or hard copy, it's gone. And we are now starting to really adhere to our retention policy to make sure it's fit for purpose. So really bringing down we're not holding on to everything just in case. We're only holding on to the things we need to hold on to for the period that we hold on to it. And actually, one of the things that's been quite challenging is making sure that we also map that sort of those matter files around what the client's expectations. So what contractually did we have in place at the start of that matter around the information that was generated, and how we store, retain, and dispose of that.
Brilliant. Daryl, although Mark sort of talked about it internationally, I guess we're based in the UK. How does that sort of resonate with what's going on in the States, and how does the UK differ from what you've seen in the States?
So obviously the European sector with GDPR has been a big factor. But one of the things that Mark's talking about is, how do you take that idea of these policies or the regulation, which is driving a lot of this, how do you take those and make them actionable against your data, right? So it's good to have, a lot of firms have gone out and hired consultants such as yourselves and say, come in, help us put together these policies, make these policies so we can say, here, we have our policies. But as Mark said, you have policies and you have personalities. So, one of the things is to remove it out of the personality and put it into a system that'll make it actionable against that. So that's one of the things we've been focusing on. We started not in the law sector. So we started in very highly regulated industries who required that. They already spent the money for the different policies. Are regulated in a lot of different areas. So they needed something that was not only giving them visibility into what that data looks like that's coming up for disposition, but also making sure that those policies are actually touching those different repositories so that they know that that policy is going to get executed against that data. Now, different jurisdictions, it's just a matter of being able to plug those policies into where that jurisdiction sits. We do see a lot of not only in corporate side, but also in larger law firms where they're taking a generalized look, right? Besides what regulations are going to impact it, they're saying with their client data, with their work product across the board, we're just going to put down, whatever policies for these big buckets. So years ago, being in this for 20 plus years in this industry, years ago, you would have not only the regulations impacting it, but you would have people being very strict to those regulations. So you would have people with, a policy for every document type. We don't see that much anymore. We see bigger buckets now. It's a little easier to manage. So we're starting to see this in bigger buckets. So in the States where we have firms that are also operating, globally, they're taking that bigger bucket policy look at that for executing their disposition and retention schedules.
So regulation is driving some of that destruction stuff.
Absolutely.
What other things are you sort of hearing? What other drivers are there? Mark mentioned moving to the cloud. I guess moving dead loads of useless stuff.
Moving to the cloud, what else Mark mentioned is old data, right? I mean, all of these firms have had old data, and it's there because one is it's a heavy lift, right, to get everybody to buy in and say, okay, now let's do something with this, and it takes resources and time and things. And part of that, I think we're seeing in the United States and other places like Mark's talking to, is changing the culture a bit. We really don't need this. It's not that valuable. And now when we're moving to the cloud, there's an additional cost coming with that. So we're seeing a lot of firms take their old data and put a deep blob storage and then start addressing the disposition against that. And we also see a lot of firms, like Mark mentioned, that they're just saying, okay, from 2000 and before, we're going to get rid of that, because not only is it old, but there's really no use for that data. You shouldn't be referencing something that's 20 plus years old. And we're hearing that more and more. So firms are starting to address that. So I think part of it, when you talk about the physical, one of the things with the physical, and we look at that as it's just another information legacy stack, right? Rather than electronic, it's the physical. And one of the things that we see is faster disposition against that, because they feel that cost more.
It's a big hard cost, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big hard cost issue. So we're seeing firms, destroying 20,000, 25,000 large numbers of boxes, utilizing our tools so that they're able to have that defensible disposition, stand it up against, any regulator or any client for that matter. And then the other side that Mark talked about are, a lot of things that are driving it in the US are outside counsel guidelines. And how are you managing those? Because now a client comes to the firm and says, okay, we have this matter, and here's all the things that we need with our data around that matter. And it's not going to fit within your disposition. It's going to fit within ours. So it's like, close a matter plus, we literally have a firm that had a matter that was close a matter plus 2 months. We want our data back, and being able to manage that to be able to get that information back to them.
And we're certainly seeing that in the market, that clients are putting more demands on how we manage their data on their behalf, which is something I think certainly when I started in role, it wasn't at all prevalent, and it seems to be something now where people are far more attuned to.
And I think a point that Mark brought up, which I think is really important, and it probably comes from saying, okay, we're going to move to the cloud, is all of a sudden having that sense of how much data is out there. The attorneys and partners aren't really knowing that, right? They're not looking into that. So when you're able to paint that picture of what that looks like, it can get some attention. We have a client, and I remember going to lunch with him and asking him, how did you get the whole firm behind you in your IG efforts? And he said, I went into the general counsel and I said, did you know that we have 300 million emails in storage? And she said, whatever you need. So it's that concept of the volume.
But very similar to the conversation I had with the GC at HFW, and the managing partner was, you have to be aware of how much data we are holding on to and the risk associated with that. And I don't think, and perhaps I'm wrong, perhaps my predecessors had articulated it, but I don't think they'd ever had it sort of really the figures waved under their nose to say, look, this is how much it is costing us to retain this. And I think back when I was at KPMG, another really good example there was their email journal costs around about £3 million per year just to retain the email journal for KPMG UK. And that's a ludicrous amount of money for an email journal. Yeah.
Yes. So just sort of moving on slightly, you've, Mark, decided to grab this sort of nettle by the roots, and I guess my question is sort of who should be responsible for information governance in a firm, and I'm going to do a quick poll. So Gemma's going to fire up a quick poll, and hopefully we can find out who you think is responsible in your firm.
Yeah, I won't say anything until people have responded, Chris. Shall I hold on?
Should we hold off?
Not that I'm going to give the actual answer, but yeah, I'm sure everyone will have a view.
I think Gemma was going to give everyone about 30 seconds. So hopefully you've all had a chance to vote. Richard Tomlinson has said it should be the head of knowledge management. And here are the results. Interesting. So the head of risk and the general counsel. Not you, Mark.
No, and I agree.
Why?
I agree. I think that's absolutely. So that's exactly. Sorry, Richard. I know Richard very well. He's a superb KM practitioner, but I agree. I think it's the head of risk that owns information governance for the organisation. I've taken it on at HFW because, one, I have been a practitioner of information throughout my career, and it's something that I think I know fairly well. But also, I think it talks to the level of maturity at our firm, and we are on that journey that says we're professionalizing a lot of these sort of elements, and risk management is one of those things at HFW that prior to joining, you would argue was probably. And Christopher, you will know because you've done some work with HFW in that department. You will know that that they've been on an evolution towards maturity, and we're still on that. So right now, it feels appropriate that I own it. I'm accountable, responsible. Probably sits across a couple of people in either risk or my head of cyber, Carl Knowles, who some on this call will know, to sort of to do the practicing bit of that. But it's yeah, I agree. I think it is the head of risk.
I think when we were talking, you talked through the sort of the RACI model, and Gavin, your general counsel, is accountable.
Yeah.
And you're responsible.
That's right. Yeah, and that's the right way to do it at the moment. We will get to the point where I will just be one of those that is doing his bit to enable proper information management, and rather than sort of being too worried about holding on to it or writing retention policies. But again, the curse of having written policies around information retention policies and the like is coming back to bite me on the bottom. So I do what I need to do.
Yeah. And Daryl, where do you see, for the firms that are successful at implementing information governance, what characteristics?
We seem to have multiple roles over the whole information governance area, with the CIO taking a technical role. We see more firms bringing in IG specialists so that they actually have someone within the firm, that's their role itself, that reports to the GC. So it still ends up flowing up to the GC. But with different multiple hats, taking part in that, seeing that the information governance is met and policies are followed.
I guess my observation would be that everybody has a responsibility, and it depends on which bit you're in. So there's somebody in finance. I was talking to a firm the other day who they're pretty good at destroying their finance records after 7 years, but they can't throw away a box regarding a matter. And then we've got other clients where they're pretty good around maybe some of their physical records, but they're a disaster when it comes to electronic.
So we hear that a lot too, right? They're finally starting to address the electronic when they've addressed the physical probably 2 or 3, 4 or 5 years ago, started a program to start destroying or getting rid of that physical record. We've also seen, Mark's talking about this, it's a journey, and all of the firms we're working with, they look at that too. It's a journey. They have their policies in place. They implement FileTrail, they turn it on, they get a shock because they see what the data looks like from a viewpoint standpoint, and then they start dealing with it. But through that journey, we have firms now that have started to mature enough where they actually have it in their onboarding plan now with new attorneys and new associates, so that it's part of that from day one, knowing that data is, it's going to fall underneath the policies of the firm.
Yeah. I guess ultimately we have to have leadership, but we'll pick that one up a bit later on. So, Mark, how do we get people to address it now? Because my guess is that we've all done our GDPR. We've ticked the box. I've got a policy around GDPR because I think I need one of those. But how do we get people to stop paying lip service and move into doing it properly?
Yeah, yeah. Or without having to wait for the ICO's fine of whichever big law firm it is that loses their data or has data they shouldn't have been holding on to. It's a heck of a challenge, and Daryl sort of touched upon it. I think that this idea that we all have a part to play, but actually getting the business owners, so that the asset owner, to understand their role to play in it, I think that's key. A lot of it's interesting. If you think about how we got rid of hard copy data, it was quite easy to say to someone, we've got very many boxes that fill a warehouse in Gloucestershire and it costs us X thousands of pounds to fill that warehouse. It's quite a bit more difficult to say that when you're talking about ones and zeros and bytes of hard drive sat in a server stack or whatever. So certainly for me, one of the things I found really powerful is just to talk about how much it costs us to just store that data in its current form and the amount we have, and then to sort of forecast what I think the spend will be if we continue to grow in the way we grow. And certainly, as we know, as I said at the start, with HFW on our journey now towards cloud services, and we want to be cloud first, it's very much part of our technology strategy. As we look at that, then you could almost pin down to the exact penny how much it's going to cost to take our data as it currently stands, and that's eye-watering. And that's a real sharp focus in an LLP, in a partnership organization. That's a real focus, a real good point to pull someone's focus to, is it will cost us this if we do it. And it's a continual drumbeat of messaging and discussion. And it's almost a weekly agenda point for me in any of my meetings with the leadership of the firm to talk about data and data management, migration, disposal, the whole gamut. And if I can get 10 minutes with any of the senior leadership of the firms, or the management board, or the GC, or the managing partner, I will talk about this as part of my journey, because it underpins everything I'm doing on my technology roadmap. It's fundamental to every slice on that journey. So it's key for me to make sure I have that sort of stakeholder buy-in to what I'm trying to achieve. I think it's really, I think we've been very fortunate in the sector that we have seen some huge sort of cyber incidents that have resulted in data loss, but we haven't yet seen the sort of the hefty ICO type fines coming into play. You just know full well that when I was at KPMG, we always had an eye on this. When I was in the information assurance role, Deloitte had lost a load of data and had to put their hands up, and it absolutely sent shockwaves through my department, as we then thought, blimey, that could have been us. And I think,
but for the grace of God, go we.
Absolutely, and I really do get a sense from speaking to peers in other law firms that we're all thinking a little bit of the same at the moment. It's, we don't want to be the one who sort of volunteers herself for the guard room and has that huge data loss of data that we shouldn't have been holding on to.
Well, and I guess it's interesting, isn't it, that Fonseca is no more 2 years after the Panama Papers.
Yeah.
So I guess there's that sort of cost of storage. I don't know whether, Daryl, there are other examples you've seen other firms using.
Well, we've seen the cost of storage being one of the bigger drivers, but we've also seen that fear and risk, right? That uncertainty, fear and risk as another driver. It's like, okay, well, we have data that goes back to 1984, and we have 21 terabytes of this old stuff, and a lot of stuff in there, those people aren't even our clients anymore. So it's even more, risky for us to have it, than just having it sit there. So we see a lot of that. We have a lot of those discussions with our customers. It's like, okay, let's take that 21 terabytes, put it in a real cold storage, less expensive, and let's start slicing it so we can start getting rid of it, but let's take a big chunk and just get rid of it now, because you don't want to even waste the time to look through it, to even consider what it is. Just pick a date and say, okay, after this, it's just gone, because there's no value in spending the time or money to even get into it. So we hear that a lot. The other thing is there's been a number of our customers that have been engaged with us because they haven't lost the clients, but they've lost significant matters because they didn't follow the previous OCGs. So literally we worked with a large global firm that, they told us the story, and they said, client came in, said, do you still have data related to this matter? And of course they said, yes, we still do. I'm sure it's out here. And the CIO said, they did a little digging and said, yes, we do. And they said, well, we're sorry, you cannot work on this matter. So they conflicted themselves out of being able to work on that matter because they didn't follow the last outside counsel guidelines. So, we're seeing that too. So it's really sensitive data that we want you to deal with in a different manner, get rid of, send it back to us, return to client, whatever it is. We're hearing a lot of those conversations. And again, that's why it's important to make those policies, even if they're outside counsel guideline policy, making them actionable. So someone can be told, here's the data that relates to this policy. You got to deal with it. We're showing it to you. You've agreed to do something.
We're picking up some really interesting things over the last 10 days, particularly picking up on your thing, Mark, about moving to the cloud. We've got a number of clients who are trying to reconcile their data between clouds. So let's say you've got a finance system and you've got the Intap risk system. Do I know that every client in my finance system is in Intap's risk system? And the only way I can do that is by doing a comparison. And on-prem, that's really easy because you just do a SQL query. But doing that through web services is really hard work and takes loads of time. And so the less you spread around, the better. Particularly if you're looking for missing data.
And it really brings home the importance of your master data management, doesn't it? Your master data record keeping and how you manage it. And that was part of the conversation we had internally. That's why my move to the cloud is sort of on soft pedal, because I know we have to get this bit right first. And I don't want to rush into the cloud and then start to scrabble backwards, because that's the bit that you then go, actually, I don't think I'll ever recover from that.
Okay.
And the idea perhaps that I give every one of my 1,100 staff access to their OneDrive, it suddenly then becomes another data repository that I haven't sort of thought about or considered, and then it's just another place that I've got data that I'm not really controlling very well. So it's, as I said at the start, for me, the key of our journey is to get this bit right, to make sure that our data is at the point that we want to move it, that it's the right data to move. It's the right data that we have to keep, or the right data that we want to keep.
Yeah. And then the other piece that we've picked up is the speed at which firms can replicate things. So, someone doing a backup and restore taking the best part of a couple of days just because of the volumes of data.
Absolutely right.
I want to sort of move on and again come back to those of you that are listening to us. Where do you see the biggest risks is going to be our next sort of topic? So we're going to go to a quick poll. So where are your key concerns around the data? Just give you a few seconds to do that, and then Gemma will pull up the results. So okay, what do we think about that? We've got metadata being number 1, legal records being 2, and then AML KYC. No one's worried about the marketing data, although I think every marketing team I know worries about whether we're GDPR compliant. And HR data.
And no financial, no CFOs on this attending this.
No. Closely guarded, I think. I thought the legal sector was over its financial data, but I guess there's lots of metadata, isn't there?
Yeah, and this is part of the education that we're going through at the moment, is understanding actually what is actually required in that metadata, in the way of retention. So as many firms, we have Microsoft Teams, and you will have a Teams channel that's set up between the sort of the Meta partner and his client, and they'll use that for conversation and whatever else, as well as WhatsApp and messaging that goes through WhatsApp. And is that the data that we want to be retaining? So we try to be very clear about how you transmit that sort of legal advice versus what's chit chat and social. So you can use Teams to say, are you free on Thursday? I'd love to give you a call and have a chat about X and Y, or the same with WhatsApp, but you're not to put into Teams, and here's the latest bit of advice. And definitely do not put it into WhatsApp or Signal or Telegram. Here's the latest bit of advice. So we try to, we don't say that people can't use those tools, because they're there to help productivity, particularly right now with the way that we're all working a little bit differently. But we want to make sure that only use the right channels to send the right information, and then it should allow us to sort of bound matter data much more effectively.
Yeah. I think what was interesting for me, and it's probably partly my my heritage and the work that we've been doing a lot of, is that whole AML data, where we've got it's probably the most personal data that we hold in firms, and it's in email, it's littered throughout the firm, and is not very well sort of curated and structured.
Absolutely. And again, it's a challenge we're facing at the moment, is the maturation of our AML KYC processes, and the use of the right tools in the business to support the whole business. You will recall, Christopher, when we adopted Intap Open at HFW as part of that sort of matter inception process, that policy falls within there, and that's where the data should be transmitting through. But you're right, we will still see instances of passport scans being sent through by email and whatever else as part of those checks. So it's certainly one of those areas we're focusing on and trying to make sure we're more alive to the risk that comes from bundles of AML data being sat in a box file somewhere in somebody's desk drawer.
Yes, and I guess you're ahead of loads of people because you've implemented your 15-year cutoff rule. And what I wonder is, what other firms have done. So we were going to go to another quick poll around those that have undertaken formal destruction of records based on their policies. So Gemma, I don't know if you can quickly pull that one up. You can select many. I think it'll be quite interesting to see this one. I've been working with some of the Pinnacle team around how you destroy, or can you destroy bits of data out of various tools, because certainly some of the risk platforms don't allow you to remove data, which gives you an interesting information governance challenge, and maybe should be part of the procurement piece. Okay, so it's pretty broad. People are reasonably good at legal records. Interesting that 33% haven't destroyed any legal records. Darryl, how does that resonate with what you would expect?
I would just wonder if how much of that 67% is physical only, from a destruction standpoint versus electronic and electronic. So we've seen that in some of our polling, that people have started, and we mentioned this earlier, right? The cost of the physical gets attention and it starts getting destroyed, more on a more frequent basis. But on the other side, we just executed a destruction against a large DM for a very large firm of 1.5 million records. And that was the first time they'd ever done that. And, most of the firms that we're dealing with, that's what they're looking to solve, right? They're looking to make sure that there's visibility into what's taking place with the data and that it's executing against the policies, so that we feel confident that we can go ahead and execute against that and destroy those records. So we haven't seen that, we've seen firms, when we ask them, have you destroyed any electronic records? It's been only on court order. I mean, we've talked to a lot of firms. So, so that I'd be interested if we slice that up a little bit, how much of it would be physical versus physical and electronic.
I guess it goes back to that sort of comment that Mark made earlier on around, each of the lawyers will have their own opinion about whether their data can be destroyed, but lawyers never argue with judges. Because judges, that's part of their training, not to argue with the judge. So where should people start? What advice do we have to people who haven't managed to get off the starting block? Mark, why don't you?
I think certainly. Yeah, sure. I think certainly it's a conversation to have with the right people. So it's a conversation with the head of risk, it's a conversation with the GC, and a conversation with the CIO. It's making sure that between the three, they have a plan for at least an understanding of how they might want to start tackling it, and I think firmly recognizing the risk doing nothing presents, because I don't think we have that luxury anymore. I would say dust off the policy that was written to meet GDPR and have a read of it and review it, and then make it fit for purpose. Certainly, when I looked at my current organization and pulled down the retention policy, and it said we were going to retain all electronic copies indefinitely because that was our business need. My heart skipped a beat, not with delight. But I thought that was an incredible decision somebody had made. But policies aren't shelfware; they're created deliberately to drive that sort of professionalism and to make sure that you do these things properly. That's the point. So I would say there, for me, that's certainly how I tackled it at HFW, is making sure that the right people knew the risk that we were carrying, And I didn't just go in and say, this is dreadful, we've got a risk, do something about it. I think it was key that I went in and said, this is dreadful, we've got a risk, and this is what we're going to do.
Yep. Daryl, what's your experience about those? Because you must have lots of people who get stuck.
Yeah, I think Mark was right on point. Most firms, they get stuck because they don't see where's the roadmap. As Mark said, it's a journey, and you need to be able to, articulate, where the start of the journey is to, what your ultimate goal is, and it's going to take some time. It's going to take, an effort, and it's going to take some technology to move there, right? And it's going to take outside consultants. It's going to take, a number of different moving parts, but, being able to lay out that roadmap, even if it's like, here's where we start, here's where we expect we can be, with these actions taking place, and benchmark a little bit of that. A number of the firms that have adopted our software is ready to execute against this, but the firm's not ready, right? So those steps are getting put in place so that the stakeholders look at it and say, okay, I feel good about this, and let's go. And the overhead isn't there anymore. I mean, so much of this has stalled because there's not that roadmap, and they just see overhead, right? It's too big. We don't know how to get our hands around it. How much is that going to cost? There's not that path for that journey to follow. So I think that's the biggest thing, and that's how you get buy-in, right? When the stakeholders see it and they know that someone's going to execute against it, and we have the right team in place and the technology, then you get the buy-in, and you start seeing some of the cultural change. Right, because you have the buy-in. The biggest thing, so we work corporate side, we work law firm side, right? The corporate side is so different, right? They said, look, we spent $500,000 on outside consultants coming in and looking at all of this. We have the regulations get changed by this tool that we purchased and everything else. So there's no debate. This, the board voted on it. There's no debate. It's over, and that's how it's going to go.
We're going to do this stuff.
Yeah. And then you have so many different chiefs in the firm, so that it's a little bit more of a culture change there than the corporate structure.
I think yes, and I guess from a Pinnacle perspective, we would say you need policies that are actionable. So they need to say, but they need to be specific about particular data classes. So, we're going to keep, I don't know, time card data. We're going to keep that for N number of years, rather than we're going to keep finance data, and it's not about systems, it's about classes of data. And then the other bit is to try and eat this elephant in 1,000 meals, because our experience is people go, it's too big a problem. I'll tell you what, I'll do it tomorrow, and tomorrow never comes.
And it'll keep growing. It's an elephant that will keep growing. It's not a problem that will stand still. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a pregnant elephant, and you'll have more elephants if you wait long enough.
And so, and it's, well, if you look at, they talk 2021 is in legal sector will be the year of the M&A. That definitely is the case, isn't it? You're going to end up with bigger and bigger unstructured silos sat in data centers or cloud instances that you aren't controlling.
Yes. So I guess we're sort of beginning to get close to sort of the end of the hour. We've talked about leadership, and you need leadership. Is there anything else that we think that people sort of need? And I guess if we think about it from a sort of risks perspective, from IT's perspective, from the data owner and user's perspective, and maybe management, what do we think that firms need to look for?
Well, I think certainly from my perspective, it's knowing that there are things you don't know, and therefore getting the right support to answer those or to help you with those unknowns. I think that's one of those things my leadership team and I at HFW are really acutely aware of is we've got bags and bags of experience and knowledge and understanding, but we don't know it all. So we require help and assistance with that. I think that's important. It is you've got to start, and it's a small whether it's the smallest of steps or the biggest of steps, you have got to start. So just getting stuck into it. And there are days when it feels insurmountable. I certainly feel that. There are days when I look at the terabyte upon terabyte of data that we've got in my 6 DCs around the world, and the thought of putting that into the cloud is probably going to get me the sack if I ask for the money to spend on that cloud instance. So I need to do something about that, and I need to do something about that in a fairly short order.
How do you report on that? Or do you report on it sort of month by month, week by week?
And I probably made a rod for my own back when I arrived in post. My first briefing to the management board was really just a bit of a briefing, and I came away feeling that I'd got away with it. So I actually asked the management board to hold me to account. So it is about I report to them now, and they will ask me questions, and they will want to know why things aren't happening at the pace at which I said they would, for instance. So this is up there. This is one of those firm-wide risks. The risk committee talks about data. We meet every month, and data is one of our standing agenda points. And I brief it to the management board every quarter when I'm in front of them. So yeah, I'm held to account for it now, and I think that's the right way to do it. At some point in the future, it'll be whoever our chief data officer is if we create a CDO, but right now it's me, and I think it's right and proper that they hold me to account for what I'm doing about the issue.
And Daryl, from what are your thoughts about what people need that they don't really have or might not have?
Well, I think it goes back to some things that Mark said, and what we see is a lot of people are starting, to look at what are the policies. A lot of this has started because of GDPR, right? And CCPA and regulations saying, okay, now you really have to get serious about this because there's ramifications behind it. So what we see is people are starting to, bring in help around, we do need policies. We need to make sure the firm policies are agreed upon, and then we need to have a plan of how we can put those out there and execute them against the data. But some of the things that Mark said, we have firms now that are just mapping out where is all the data, right? So if we're going to start putting policies against that data, if it's HR, financial, they know where the financial data is, but there's marketing data, there's all of these different silos. Where are all of those silos? Where are the file shares that we better start locking down or controlling to be matter centric and not just free flowing? All of those different steps. Can we develop a taxonomy within this practice area that we can start following that's going to map to our policies, right? So can we get that? If we're saying, if consultants came in and said, we looked at your data, we see you have this type of data, this maps to these types of regulations, and then you want to add something on top of that from the firm side to say, okay, the regulation says 5 years, we're going to make it 7 years just to give us a cushion for that type of documentation or those documents. Okay, do we have the taxonomy set up that we can now touch that policy to that regulation, right? And then, or if you're doing the bigger buckets, if it's work product within a matter within this practice area, then that big bucket is going to be close a matter plus 7 years. And we know some attorneys don't like to close matters, so we need some events to be able to even look at that and trigger that. So can we use a tool like FileTrail that'll go out and say, hey, there's been no billing on this matter for 5 years. I think it should probably be closed.
It's closed.
Yeah. So there's all of those different things that come up. But if you're going to have a policy, you need to be able to relate it to something in the data that you can now manage that, right? So, there's eventually structure gets built, or you get bigger buckets and say it's matter, work product, and that's the big bucket.
Cool. And I guess, and I guess part of the reason we've signed a partnership with FileTrail is we've got a client where they've written loads of policies, and the GC wrote the policies and has lobbed it at IT to say, it's your job to enact the policy. And IT is sitting there going,
yeah,
great, thanks for that. And from the GC's point of view, their backside is covered because I've written the policy, we've got a policy, IT failed to execute said policy. It's not my fault.
We've been in those conversations, and it comes on, where is the policy, and how does it map to where the data is? And the policy's right back here on that bookshelf.
Yeah. We have a library of policies.
Yeah.
So just to sort of wrap up, Mark, what are your next steps for information governance at HFW?
It's the brave move to reduce from 15 years down to 7 as our standard retention policy. There will be exceptions to that, and there will be some things that we'll dispose of sooner, but we're looking to reduce that. And it really is about the data that we hold on to. If we want to get that insight from it, it needs to be data that is current. We've got to think about the regulation that underpins that information. So making sure we're not holding stuff just because. But as I say, from my sort of technology standpoint, I want to be as lean as I can be as we progress into the cloud, to make sure that I'm only putting the right data in the right place.
Cool. So you're going back to the army, putting on your flak jacket, your tin helmet,
yeah,
and you're going to go back out.
Yeah,
to the legal department. So
absolutely, and I was tickled at that idea that the GC would write the policy and then ask IT to enact it, and that was the common thread when I arrived in post. The business would say IT does to us, and I'm very keen to make sure that the business understands this is their decision, that I'm doing it on their behalf, and they're the business owners, and it's not PAR's grand idea that I'm just going to come and cut swathes of data out of the network. It's all about I'm doing the right thing to manage risk for our firm, but they're part of it. So yeah, that's.
Which I guess is one of the things we haven't really talked about, which is that I guess users need to agree to the destruction and be empowered to, you're essentially, I think what you're saying is you're going to say this needs to go. They go, yeah, you're right, it needs to go. And having tools that help you do that.
Absolutely, but making sure the conversation isn't, do you want to get rid of this? The conversation is, this needs to go, and you're going to agree with me, but it's your decision that it's going.
Yes. Yeah. Daryl, anything you want to add?
I'll just add a little bit onto Mark's last comment here. So a lot of firms we're working with today went from the concept of, okay, we're going to let you look at this and make a decision, to, wait a minute, we made a decision. This is just a courtesy for you to see what we're doing now. So we're not going to rely on you to say it's okay for this disposition, because we already made that agreement that's taking place. We're going to give you a courtesy view of what your data look like, but we have firms that now get the courtesy view and they want to put everything on hold because they're like, wait a minute, that's mine, and it escalates and it goes through that workflow, so that makes sure that it gets executed. So, yeah.
Cool. I hope for everyone who's been listening, it's been a really valuable hour or so. We can collectively help you sort of create the policies, make them actionable. We can help you analyze the data, and Daryl and the Pinnacle team can, help you with some technologies if that's what you want or need. We haven't, I don't think, had any questions in the chat, which must mean that we've been doing a brilliant job, or everyone has switched off. If there are any questions, be quick, and Gemma and John and Brian will feed those onto us. But on the assumption that there aren't any, Mark, thank you very much indeed. I hope for everyone else, certainly for me, it was a really interesting hour or so. I hope it was for everyone else. Getting lots of positive responses on the chat. Daryl, thank you for coming out of the big freeze in Texas.
In Texas, yeah.
Yeah, quite right. Yeah.
And everyone who's been on the call, good luck. If we can help, just shout, and you can find us on LinkedIn or on the Pinnacle, or I'm sure Mark's on the HFW website, and Daryl will be on the FileTrail one. So thank you very much indeed, and we'll wrap it up there.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Cheerio.
Thank you, everyone.